By the summer of 2001, I found myself in a kind of spiritual limbo. I began to feel excluded from my church community in ways I had not felt previously, but at the same time, I felt an obligation to remain within the community. Because again, I felt that I already knew everything that I needed to know about my religion, and leaving the church would equate to seemingly turning my back on God. And that's something which I obviously could not do because of the eternal consequences. So I kind of remained in this place for a very long time, 7 years to be precise. That's not being used for illustrative purposes. That's simply how long I kind of remained in this state of limbo. Now, from 2001 to 2003, I became very obsessed with Christian music. I would keep track of release dates of new Christian albums every week and would spend multiple hours a day reading and posting on Christian music forums. And I think that this excessive involvement in this community served a few purposes. The first was it continued to feed and reinforce the meta-narrative which I described in the previous segment of this series. Additionally, it provided a kind of solace for the condition that I found myself in, of feeling like I had some kind of deep, dark secret which I couldn't tell anyone. So I was able to grab out of that a feeling of solace without actually having to expose anything. I was kind of able to keep myself protected, or feeling protected and safe in a way. And in addition to that, it kept me distracted, or at least I thought it was going to, keeping me from being alone with my thoughts, because that's not something which I wanted to happen, because I felt that my thoughts would go to some kind of dark place, or I would allow Satan to influence my thoughts and lead me down a path where I wasn't supposed to go. And of course, this is obviously something which I had done already to explain the state in which I found myself. Another way in which I behaved during this period, I became very angry at a lot of other people, particularly family members. And this was because I was very eager to point out what I saw as flaws in others' character. Because, again, this was a way to distract me from focusing on what I considered to be my own imperfections. So I was kind of able to project my personal dissatisfaction onto other people. Some changes began to happen in the year 2004, and I'm not exactly sure why all of these changes started taking place in this specific year. But there was a time early that year where I kind of found myself getting into a deeper conversation with my mother than would usually happen. and kind of a rather telling answer to a specific question. She asked me what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, because she felt that I wasn't exactly sure. And the answer I gave her was nothing. I actually said this, although I really didn't give her specific reasons why this was. This being because I did not want to interrupt the seemingly stable environment that I had constructed. Specifically, I felt that no one could find out about my real secret. Another pivotal moment during the year 2004 was the death of my grandfather. And, I'm not exactly sure why this became an impetus for unprecedented action for me at the time, other than possibly reminding me of the brevity of life. Maybe something like that. But I kind of used that as the springboard to go see a movie by myself, and something that I specifically wanted to see just for me. Yeah, so kind of up to this point, growing up, movies were extremely restricted. R-rated movies were strictly forbidden, out of the question. And when it came to PG-13 movies, you also had to be quite careful as to what profanity or sexual content you would expose yourself to, because obviously, you're not supposed to defile yourself with worldly things like that. You're going to be leaving yourself vulnerable to temptation. So, the first movie that I chose to see by myself was the Steven Spielberg film The Terminal, with Tom Hanks and Catherine Zeta-Jones. And while I don't think it's a particularly great movie, this was the first example which I remember of a movie providing some kind of insight into the characters, and on a broader scale, how people behave and interact with each other, kind of outside of my little Christian bubble. Now, they're fictional people, of course, but I felt that I was gleaning something which I had not had before. And, in addition to that, this was another avenue through which I could gain empathy without having to put myself out there. It was still something which was felt very safe to do. So kind of also around this time, I was becoming more and more disinterested in the Christian music industry. My interest just started to kind of wane. I think I was disappointed with some newer releases by artists at the time. So I then kind of latched on to the movie going as the new hobby, which is going to take up a considerable amount of time. So I began watching 5 to 7 movies a week. And in addition to this, I began to listen to classic rock radio. So that's something which I also latched onto, and something which I had zero exposure to previously. So for me, these were fairly dramatic changes. It may have been exposure to these new art forms or simply maturing that began to temper this angry young man persona which I had been exhibiting. I think that this kind of eroded my expectation for other people to be perfect, which was also kind of a projection of my own imperative to be perfect. I think I began to think and see things in less black and white ways. And all of this without having to make myself vulnerable. Although I began to do so. So in the latter part of 2004, in addition to the regular Sunday attendance and a men's Bible study on Tuesday, I would also start attending what they called a college and career group on Friday. So this was for young adults 18 to 30. And while the first half of this was focused around Bible study like the other ministries were, but it also provided an opportunity for socializing, which I really had zero experience with previously. It may have been an opportunity in high school, but it's something which I deliberately kept myself out of. So I kind of began to feel that I may have found a place where I could feel that I belonged. So that was good. But something which disrupted that fairly quickly, just several months later. So we're now getting into the beginning of 2005. I found questionable websites in my brother's browsing history and wondering exactly what this was, or at least wanting to wonder exactly what this was, when I knew exactly what this was the first time I saw this. My brother is gay. And it was a considerable amount of time before anyone else found out, because I certainly wasn't going to tell anyone anything about it, because an assumption which I also made immediately was he must know about me too. So if I were to rat him out, he's going to rat me out. And that's something which I could not allow to happen. So I kept quiet. And then, several months later, people must have found out somehow, but it certainly didn't come from me. Because I noticed that he was leaving once a week for something which was being referred to as appointments. And, it's not something which I asked anything about, because, again, this kind of thing was something which you just didn't talk about. So even though I knew exactly what these appointments were about, so I was sure that he was seeing a pastor because of this sin problem which needed to be corrected. And me being very worried that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, that I would be put into the same kind of situation. See, at this point, I thought that I would be able to get over this problem with just me and God. Even though that clearly wasn't happening.